Welcome to the Authentic Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Barron, and I am joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Bob Lyron. Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks.
Today we're going to be talking about Joel and Ethan Coen's 2007 masterpiece, No Country for Old Men. This is our 10th episode, and this was your choice today, and I just want to say that this is an extraordinarily challenging film to talk about, but I think it's just a perfect choice for our 10th episode, our kind of first milestone episode. So,
congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations to you, and a big thank you for doing this with me, for going on this journey with me. We've had a lot of discussions. We've even had a previous recording session over this, but we talked about before on our previous failed attempt. We talked about how this film is on both of our top 10 film lists, which remember, we said they're both these are really fluid lists, guys. So it's constantly changing. But at the time you said something, you said that it's moved from anywhere from fifth place basically to first place, and it kind of shifts up and down in that section of the list. So it's really in your top 5 list. And what is it that what do you love about this movie? Why is it on that list for you?
When it was my turn to pick a film, I was thinking about what are my favorite films, and all those films in my top 5, I would hope that we eventually get to on this podcast. But I was thinking about those films, and I thought about No Country for Old Men. And I think the reason I decided to pick it, not only is it one of my favorite films, but it deals with something that you and I have talked about a lot, which over the years we've talked about. And I think it's a part of this podcast. It's going to be a part of this podcast going forward, which is this idea of authenticity and genre. Because I think one of the things that makes No Country for Old Men so great is that it works as this just master crafted genre film. It's like a chase film, or you can apply different genres to it, but in my case it's like a crime thriller. And it works on every level as a crime thriller. It might be the best crime thriller I've ever seen, which is why I love it so much. But, in keeping with the brilliance of the Coen brothers, there's so much more to the story. And of course, it's adapted from a Cormac McCarthy novel, which lays an amazing foundation for them to do their work. But I just think that not only does it work as an excellent genre film, crime thriller, but the more you peel back, the more layers of an onion that you peel back on this film, you discover so much. And I think it just makes it ripe for conversation when you're talking about authentic work. Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about this idea of genre, particularly with No Country for Old Men, because you're right. It could be seen as a crime thriller. Absolutely. It's like a series of essentially murders and robberies that are going on in this film. But it can also, I think you can access it as a Western, obviously, or an anti-Western. I think
like
there's
a neo-Western,
like a neo-Western or a critique of the Western almost, or something, but then still a Western, I think also, so Western crime drama. I think for me, the way that I access this film, or the way I kind of interpreted it, was certainly all those things, but I also see it very much as like a horror film, actually. For me, I think you could even say that this film is a monster movie. What's so great about this film, and maybe about, one of the things that's so great about this film, and I think Coen Brothers movies more broadly, is that this film absolutely deals with some of the most profound. This film gets as profound as it can get, and I would even argue back to people this film is as profound as something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and people are gonna be like, "What?" And I'm like, "No, it really will. If you follow it all the way, if you really follow this film all the way, it will take you as far as literally, I think the human mind can go. In fact, I think that's part of what this is about. Exactly. It's going to take you into the limits, it'll take you right to the very limit of what is thinkable, and
I think that what's so cool is that you're right. It's but the thing is that you don't have to go to to those limits, which is, you don't have to necessarily buy the ticket and take the ride if you don't want to. That's what the Coens are, clearly, they're probably your favorite filmmakers. I would say, if you took like a whole body of work and
probably,
just looked at, probably like Kubrick.
Even if I tried to argue back, like, no, well, actually, Bob, people could be like, Mike, we're looking at your watch history here. You've spent 10,000 hours watching The Big Lebowski. Like it's not,
But if you look at their whole body of work, I think that they've always kind of operated in genre, and maybe
Absolutely.
And this, this isn't necessarily a podcast about the Coen brothers, but I think that what they find, or what I feel when I watch their films, is because they're given like these sort of subsets of genre, that it actually affords them, even though genre filmmaking can sometimes be confining because you have to follow the rules of that genre, right. It gives them the opportunity to explore much greater ideas. And it's almost like by confining them and putting them in a box, you're actually forcing them to be as creative as they possibly can be. And I think that that happens a lot with really great artists, and they're no different. And so like No Country for Old Men, like you think you're watching a crime thriller, but actually you're watching something that's a meditation on the indifference of the universe and how it manifests itself in different people. And like, oh my God.
You might go into it thinking you're watching a cool Western, and you might end up contemplating the absence of God, be careful, guys. Yeah. But kind of a couple things I wanted to say just on the Coens, like that I think you're absolutely right. I mean, what I've always loved about the Coens, first of all, there's actually probably too many things I want to say about them, but I've always truly loved about the Coens is that they always make films I think about, in a sense, I used to say they make kind of folk cinema. They make films about kind of the ordinary people, and kind of their films will right, exactly. It's a great word for it, like regional. They go into like regions, and they just tell extraordinary stories about ordinary people.
I think what makes them so amazing is that all of their films work on both levels, and so they're incredibly popular. They've got a foot kind of in each on each side of the line, where they're actually making very thought-provoking, authentic film, but they're also just showing something. If you want to sit down and kind of watch a sort of pot boiler about a hippie trying to solve, and it's funny, then you can watch Lebowski. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you can enjoy these films on, I think, exactly. You can enjoy these films on all kinds of different levels. The last thing that I wanted to just mention about the Coen brothers, and why I think they work so well with Cormac McCarthy, I think that this film, it has a slightly different energy about it than the other Coen brothers films. And I haven't been quite able to articulate exactly what it is to myself yet. Like, what is it? But there's something about this film that has a slightly different aura. My first instinct is to say it's because it's such a close collaboration with Cormac McCarthy. And you even told me that you had done the research, and they had said, while they were writing it, they were like, we actually didn't have to write much, because No Country for Old Men the novel started out, it was actually McCarthy attempted to write it as a screenplay in the first place, right? So it's almost like he is a co-writer of the screenplay with them, at least. But why does that work? Why are they not getting in each other's way? The thing is, I think it's because the Coen brothers, and it goes back to what you said about they kind of, or what we were talking about, how they make these regional films.
Exactly.
I think that the Coen brothers have I think their power generates from their mastery of language. They really understand the musicality of the language, the rhythm of these regional languages. Mm-hmm. They understand it on such a deep level that they understand that it's how it's connected to the world of the story that it comes from. How this language, how the musicality of the language reveals kind of the actual physical landscapes, the regions. I think what made this successful is that they understand what to do with McCarthy, because McCarthy is all about language. He's a writer. Mm-hmm. And I think they understand. They are masters of language too. And I think this is why this is such a great collaboration between the two of them. You had a very good idea about how to approach this film.
Okay.
We discussed this last night in our prep. You guys, Bob had a really good idea about how to approach this, because there's, as we discovered last weekend, like there's just so many ways you can. Yeah,
there's a lot of ways to get into the movie.
It can overwhelm you, much like the indifferent cosmos that it shows you, like, can just completely scramble your brain. This film can do that. But you and I were discussing this last night. We're kind of pepping each other up. And I think you had a good idea, which is like, maybe let's pick kind of what we decided were the three main characters and just kind of talk about who they are, who are these guys? Like, and we don't have to start at the cosmic horror, the mythological, cosmic horror level, but what's going on with these guys? And if you don't mind, like so the three guys that I think we should focus on, and then we can bring in other characters as needed. But I think they're really the central characters, of course, is Anton Chigurh, the psychopathic killer in
Force of nature.
Force of nature, played by Javier Bardem. Just one of the greatest performances of all time. One of the greatest movie villains, I think, of all time. And then we have Llewelyn Moss, who is played by Josh Brolin, who also is just fucking fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, he's so on point.
He's great. And then, of course, the great Tommy Lee Jones as Sheriff Bell, who's kind of, he's the narrator of the story.
Yeah.
He's the one who's telling us this story.
Yeah. And telling his own story in the process. Do
you mind if we start by talking about Chigurh? And part of the reason I want to talk about him first is just because I think he's the one who gets talked about the most. He is such a unique villain. I don't think there's ever been another villain like that portrayed. Who is this guy?
There's a scene in the film where Carson Wells, who's played by Woody Harrelson, visits Moss when he's in the hospital in Mexico recovering from his shootout with Chigurh. And Wells, the Wells character, said he's talking about Chigurh, and he's like, what he says is, it's a quote. He said, I'll read it. He says, he's a peculiar man. You might even say he has principles that transcend money or drugs. He's not like you. He's not even like me.
What are they? I mean, randomness. He seems to be a servant of total, indifferent randomness, of chance. And
I think it's tricky sometimes when you watch the movie, because he does exist. He literally is a person in this movie. We see him do things, but the essence of who he is this idea that I mentioned earlier. To me, is this idea that he's kind of this personification of a larger world. And again, we're not trying to get into the cosmic side of it, but I bring that up to say that it kind of informs everything about his character. He seems on the outside like this psychopathic, just maniac, whereas in reality, what he is this calculated, cool, indifferent hunter, tracker.
I think what I would just like to comment on for me, that he is this idea of him as being a kind of a movie monster, actually. And you asked me last time, you were like, when did you start thinking deeper about this movie? Like, when was it hitting you on a deeper level? And I said at that time, I said, in actually, like, the very first scene of the film, basically, where he chokes out the death, he strangles the deputy to death. Yeah. And he's on the floor, like, strangling a man to death, and the deputy is absolutely in the most violent kind of struggle imaginable, powerless to do anything. But it's just a shot of Bardem's face, and it's a mask. It has that kind of, I remember the impression it made on me at the time was almost a Japanese kabuki mask or samurai mask, like a frozen demonic. It's not quite a smile, I guess, but it was a mask. And there's an aspect about Chigurh that I think is really interesting. When he gets injured in the film, because he gets hurt. He gets, Moss.
He's susceptible to the indifference that he represents.
I had this idea of like it's almost like he is this force that's just like wearing a body, because when he's hurt, right, he just sort of repairs himself, like when he goes and blows. Yeah, exactly. It's a lot like the Terminator, actually, like he comes in, he blows up the car in front of the pharmacy and then walks in, and then he goes to the hotel room, and with that almost the same kind of mask quality, he just sort of puts his body back together.
Very methodical.
It's methodical. It's precise. And another thing that speaks to this as well, I think, is his sort of murder weapon. And I looked up the name of that device, and I think it's called a captive bolt pistol. And what that thing does is it's used in like industrial farming, cattle farming. And what it does to a cow is it like It shoots that rod into the cow and it stuns it. But if you use that against a human, it will go in and like puncture like the human skull, and as we see in the film, it just like it's
like being shot without a bullet.
Being shot in the head without a bullet. And it is such a distinct murder weapon, like a really strange and terrifyingly efficient weapon. In the first scene, when the deputy is on the phone, he tells him that the hose of it was actually woven into Chigurh's shirt. It made me think, like, in a way, that weapon is kind of a part of his body. It's actually like a part of him is this thing. Like, it's this tool, of course, but it's almost part of the monster that makes up his totality, if that makes sense. And
yeah, it does.
One of the things I thought about was like this idea just of it's this uber efficient murder weapon where it's just a rod going in and out. That's it. Just ka-chunk. That's it. You're alive. Now you're dead. It's that fast. There's no romance here. There's no struggle. There's no meaning. It's like you've been processed. It's the fastest murder weapon I've ever seen in a movie, to the point that you wonder that the person receiving that never knows that they've been killed. Like they don't even know that they've been killed. It's that fast.
What struck me when I was watching the film was how intimate and personal it is. Like you have to essentially be standing right in front of the person, and the hose goes into your hand, and then you have the mechanism in your hand, almost like a trigger. But you can't operate it from 7 feet away, or like Moss does from 800 yards away. You literally have to be almost touching them. And to use it, you have to almost essentially put your hand on top of their head, almost like you're blessing them, like a pope. Right. You know what I mean? Like you're just kind of putting your hand up there, and then it's like, bang, it's like they're gone.
Like a benediction.
Exactly. But there's an intimacy to that that's really frightening. One of the other things that there's something I wanted to talk about with the character of Chigurh, and I also want to talk about it with the character of Moss. And I think that this also can be tied into this idea of genre. And you brought it up earlier with the scene where he kind of repairs himself after he's been shot.
Yeah, and I wanted to specify there real quick. Sorry, I'm so sorry, but it's a you have this sense of someone being repaired as opposed to healing, if that makes sense.
I think that one of the cool things about the Chigurh character, the Moss character, and what the Coens do is they do a lot of like showing you stuff rather than telling you stuff. And I think that that's one of the things that makes the film so interesting, and why so many people like it is we like to watch people know things and do things that we don't know how to do. So we can put ourselves in that situation. Like, when Chigurh gets shot, you're like, well, you're fucked now, dude. But like, no, he's not, because he has the tools, to actually make himself better. And so we get to watch this whole process, and it's so cool to watch things be done by characters that have knowledge that you don't have.
I also think there's an aspect with Chigurh that I think is fascinating, which is he seems to be able to exploit all the cracks in order, like a symbol that represents chaos, let's say, or death, chaos, entropy, decay, like the inevitability of death or something. Like, it doesn't matter, like the sort of structures we set off to stave off that thing, it's still coming for you. And I think that in that very first scene, we see that when he chokes the deputy, like literally he uses the thing that is literally a restraint, and he's able to convert that into the murder weapon. In other words, there's this sense that death can even turn the order that you create against you. It can get in through the cracks, like it can seep in under the door. There's no way to hide from this guy. It can go into the vent. It can, he's everywhere. So yeah, Chigurh, I think we've covered that. Is there anything else we want to talk about our buddy Chigurh?
Yeah, I think not necessarily a good hang, but like, whatever. Unlike Moss, who we can move on to Moss, who does seem like a good hang. He does seem like a pretty cool dude.
Who is Moss?
Yeah, who is he? I think that, well, he's the hero. I guess you could say he's the hero of the story. He's like the antagonist of the story.
I absolutely think he is the hero of the story. I think that
he's resourceful. He's smart, and he's a guy that happened to stumble on a satchel of money, and now is navigating this indifferent world, this seemingly like cruel, challenging world that you're now a part of because of these extenuating circumstances. And it's going to take all of your wit, your experience, and your intelligence to try to navigate it. And then, by the way, you've got this sort of agent of indifference and cruelty chasing after you in Chigurh trying to find you.
And I think if we do look at this through like a Western, like he's a play on that very American myth of the rugged individual. He's also, I think, almost like a Greek tragic hero.
In what way?
In the sense that he is defiant to these inevitable forces. One of my favorite lines in the movie is in the scene where he's got Wells in the hotel, and then Moss calls to call Wells, and then Chigurh's there and answers the phone. And Chigurh tells him, essentially, you're going to die no matter what, but if you come to me now, I'll let your wife live. And then Llewelyn Moss says, you know what? I'm going to make you a special project of mine.
Yeah, you're not going to have to find me. I'm going to come find you.
Yeah, I'm going to find you, right?
Yeah.
And that mold fits at least one Greek myth or that I can think of in the Iliad. Hector, right, goes out to face Achilles at the end, and everybody's like, don't go, like you're gonna die for sure, and he's like, I have to go even though I know I'm gonna die. There is this defiance to Moss that is gonna, I think it does connect down to the deepest mythological level. I think he represents essentially, boy, I'm really flying in the clouds now, but like this guy would like punch me in the face for what I'm about to say right now because it's so flowery, but he represents life. The thing about Moss is in this hunting trip and in the discovery of the money, right? And then in this game that he suddenly is kind of finds himself within. I think what's happening to Moss is that he actually loves the game, right? Because it makes him feel alive again. He's got to escape these impossible forces. The cartels, who are actually the ones that end up killing him, not Chigurh. It's the cartels that kill him. He's got the cartels. He's got Chigurh. He's got, in his mind, probably the sheriff also coming after him. He's got to evade all of this. And dude, I'm sorry, it's impossible. And yet he's going to do it anyway. And I think there's this aspect to him of, he likes that. Death is coming for me. And it's actually this game of evading it as long as you can.
That's interesting. And I have a question. I'd like to know what you think about Moss's morality, because I think that his morality plays a huge part in the movie. Like, the jump off is after he finds the money, he makes this crucial mistake where he feels bad about leaving one of the cartel members there dying, and the guy wanted water. And so he goes back to take him some water. If he had never done that, he was scot-free. He
wouldn't have been scot-free because he has the transponder is in the money. Right. So
that's true. Yeah. But like, that's what kind of kicks it off with the cartel. Right. And it's like, it's an act of morality. And clearly he's someone that loves his wife, for example.
Sure.
And, in the end, it becomes about like you said, that the scene where he threatens Chigurh and says, I'm coming after you, that's really kind of a pivot point from him being the hunted to turning into the hunter. And so like he does that in part because Chigurh basically says, like, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill your wife. And so there's like a deep love and respect for his wife. He's obviously got this like kind of underlying morality, which probably ties into like this archetype that you mentioned before about like the stoic sort of
tragic hero, he's a tragic hero.
The last thing is that a last kind of interesting thing I think about Moss is throughout the movie, he doesn't really change. Like, he's essentially the same person from the first scene to the last scene.
What we're seeing also is a man who is going to make his own value structures, right? He is going to do this his way. He's the ultimate, in a way, Western hero.
I think the reason that the film works so well and it's so easy for so many people to watch is he's like this ultimate example of like watching a guy do the thing. Like, you put yourself, like the Coen said, like, we wanted to cast this everyman. Well, now, like, literally every man that watches this movie, and woman for that matter, can watch it and be like, oh my, it's like essentially like, what's he going to do now? Like, what, and it's like everything. It's like the way he pulls the clip out of the gun and blows the water out of it and sticks it in. And like, the way that he does, like, I love the part when he's laying in bed in the second hotel room right before that insanely intense scene with Chigurh on the other side of the door, and he's thinking about how Chigurh found him at the first motel, and he's laying there and he can't sleep, and he's like, there's just no way. And he sits because he knows it's not possible. There's no way that would just happen. And so that forces him to kind of like start looking through the money. And anyway, he's just it's a great character for literally every man to watch, because it's so fun to watch him do the movie.
It is fun, right? Yeah. And that's what's so cool about this movie. It kind of goes into what we were talking about, the genre and the accessibility. It's so great when you watch a movie and the character is so fucking cool and profound.
Right,
you know, like
exactly.
The character of Llewelyn Moss like gives you everything you want. He's such a deep, complicated, you know, in a lot of ways character, but he's also just like, he's great, you know, and it's that depth to him that makes it even, and this dynamic about him that just makes him so great. Okay, we were almost to Belle, and
let's go. With No Country for Old Men, like, it's just so intense. And I mean, we haven't even gotten to like the genre side of like just the cat and mouse game that goes on between Chigurh and it's just those intense scenes of like, you know, in both hotel sequences, like, oh my God, you're like sitting on the edge of your seat. Yeah. And then, but the more you watch it, the more you start to realize, like, is this Sheriff Bell's movie? Is he like, he's kind of the one that is grounded in this whole thing. Like, he's the through line of the film. I mean,
he's the narrator. He's telling the story.
Yeah. Exactly. The film opens with his narration and closes with his reflections of dreams that he had about this scenario. And so really he is, and then, you know, for me, I know that you have things to add, but for me, if I'm kind of keeping with this idea that, like, you know, if this overall overreaching thing of like an indifferent universe, and Chigurh is sort of like the agent of that, and Moss is sort of like the idea of man navigating that, then I would say that Bell is sort of like the observer. He's like almost like the record keeper of this indifferent world, and he's trying to sort of figure it out, and by an extension kind of control it or fix it, you know. And anyway, I think that's probably a good jump off point for you, but that's kind of like what I see when I see Bell.
He is definitely observing, right? If we just approach him as a man for a minute, you know, like, and not quite into the symbolism yet, which I'm prone to do. I just want to, like, you know, inject symbolism into my veins. But, like, you know, I love the opening monologue to the story. Great. I love that
he lays it all out for you.
Yeah, and it opens up on this horizon, you know, that big, beautiful Texan dawn light plateau will be there forever. You know, it reminds me a lot of the opening of 2001 in the African plains. Actually has a similar vibe to it. This sort of like deep time, you know. But anyway, but it opens and he talks about how he's been a sheriff for since he was 25 years old.
Yeah.
And whatever, he comes from sheriffs, and then he talks about how a couple of sheriffs in his county didn't have to even wear guns at a certain point.
Yeah, the old timers.
Like the old timers, and he never hesitates. He always misses it. He never wants to miss a chance to hear a story from the old timers. And then he tells you about a murder where a man murdered a 14-year-old girl, and the way that they talked about it in the papers described it as a crime of passion. But because he arrested the man, and as he said, sent him to a chair, he actually knows what really happened. And the guy told him that the guy murdered the little girl, the 14-year-old girl, because he always just wanted to murder somebody. And so he did it.
He actually refers to him as a boy. I got the impression that it was so like maybe he was like a 16 or 17-year-old boy that killed a 14-year-old girl, which makes it even worse.
It's just horrific, you know. And then I love the line, like, he knows he's going to hell and he'll be there in 15 minutes, you know.
Yeah, he'll be there in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, he wants to go to hell, you know, like he wants to go to hell. And then he tells you the crime that I'm about to show you, it's hard to take its measure, you know, and you're just like, wait, what? Like, what's the... And all of this, is to just illustrate that there's this sense about Bell. He's a man where the world around him has changed. The established order, the way things were, you know, like it's changed. And actually what I would say about Bell, what makes him compelling, is that he does understand what he sees. And because he understands what he sees, he can't face it. And he spends the whole film actually in this strange dealing with the things that are going on, actually. If you think about, like, he'll talk to Moss's wife and he's saying he wants to keep him safe and tell him to call me. and this kind of thing. And I'm sure he can't just like go find him. But remember, there's the scene where he's in his office and I don't know if it's his secretary or another lady that works.
Yeah, it's a secretary.
She tells him that the DEA, I think, or somebody has been trying to contact him because they need to go back out to the site and talk to him. And he's like, yeah, I don't, like, just tell him I'm busy. Like, he's avoiding them. You have this idea, I guess, of this man who doesn't want to face like this reality, I guess. Like there's this feeling about him. Like, and I would argue it's because he does kind of actually understand the true horror of what is really there. Yeah.
He says something in the opening monologue. I mean, I don't have this in my notes. I just have it committed to memory. That just goes to show you how many times I've seen this movie. But he says in the opening monologue when he's talking about like the crime you see today, it's hard to take its measure.
Yeah.
And he says, it's not that I'm afraid of it. It's just that I feel like if you want to be a part of it, i.e. to be Sheriff Bell, you're going to have to push your chips forward and say, okay, I'll be a part of this world. Exactly.
I'll be a part of this world. And so
exactly.
Thank you, Bob.
It's like, you're right. He sees it, and there is an underlying fear of a world that he doesn't understand. He says it's not that I'm afraid of it, but I don't know if I can go and face something that I don't understand. And so that is essentially like what leads him or follows him through this film is this inability to wrap his head around what's going on, and it makes him afraid. He's afraid of it because he doesn't understand it. And like to play into this grander theme of this vast indifference she's a sheriff, dude. He's been a sheriff for since he was 25 years old. He's all about control and protecting people and protecting the community and order,
establishing law and order, right?
Exactly.
And Westerns,
and now he feels, exactly.
I heard this great podcast conversation between Todd McGowan and Ryan Engley. They have a podcast called Why Theory. I just need to put that there for, reference. But they talked about that the kind of like one of the main themes of Westerns is the establishment of order in the frontier, right? Like how law and order and essentially the state establish themselves in chaos, basically, right? How order generates from a chaotic circumstances. Sorry, I just wanted to say that. And Bell
that's what Shell is. That's what Bell is.
Bell represents that. He represents order. He represents, and with that, I think, represents this idea that also reason, rationality, reason, meaning, like that meaning is established by reason and rationality. And he sees a world where, and this is what makes it kind of an anti-Western in a sense too, is that like Westerns are traditionally were about the establishment of order. This film is about the decay of order.
Right.
And there's that great scene where when he goes to the hotel, and that's the scene where he actually does finally fucking commit to go find Chigurh. He's going to go because the other sheriff tells him the guy goes back to crime scenes the next day and kills more people. So he finally decides that he's going to go confront the other side, right? Like the chaos. And he's outside the door. He's hesitant. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip through this fast, and then you see Chigurh on the other side of the door. And I watched this film with my wife, by the way, last week. She couldn't remember if she had seen it or not. So basically it was like watching it for the first time. And she was like, just clinging to my arm. I'm like, oh my God, it's so suspenseful. And he opens the door, and of course, Chigurh is mysteriously not there. And then we see that the bathroom window is closed. But there's this great shot of his silhouette being projected to the wall across. It's almost literally the anti-image of John Ford's The Searchers, where he opens up the door and then the landscape opens up. This is like the reverse image of that. Now we're seeing a silhouette projected on an interior wall. Right. And I think it says to me that this is about the decay. But the comment, I'll be a part of this world. I think it's like about how Bell has to understand that he is not apart from this world. He is a part of this world. And I think we talked about, so can we talk about real quick with Bell? And stop me if you want to go in another direction. It's fine. But why? This is a very sort of unresolved and unexplained and very mysterious scene. The fact that he does not see Chigurh, right?
Yeah. So
why do you think he doesn't see Chigurh? Why don't they see each other? Why isn't he actually? What's going on there? You know?
Yeah, that's great. It's I was about to say it's the most important scene in the film, and then we've made this mistake before. We're like, well, except for the one where he talks about the dreams, and then the one where he goes to see Ellis. But anyway, it is. I think for Bell, it's the crucial moment in the film, because, like you said, I think that it's all about him confronting this fear, this unknown. It's not that I'm afraid of it. It's just that I don't want to put my chips forward and try to go out there and fight something that I don't understand. And that is personified in this idea for Bell that this guy is on the other side of the door. And it's actually pretty highfalutin filmmaking decision by the Coen brothers, grounded in this genre crime thriller. Pretty ballsy to, like, a lot of your average Saturday matinee moviegoers are not really going to they're going to be like, what the hell?
Blue hairs may not dig this.
Exactly. Is he behind the door? Is he not behind the door? And
this is not a film where you go drop kids off at the mall.
No, this is what it is that image of Chigurh hiding behind the door is a projection of Bell's fear. Because he knows that if he opens this door and he's in there, he's going to die. And he summons the courage to do it. And then, of course, Chigurh's not in there. And he goes and sits down on the bed, and he looks down at the carpet, and he sees the screws from where Chigurh had been there to get the money. Okay.
Was it Chigurh to get the money, or was it Moss to get the money? I feel like it was Moss trying to get the money.
No, because Moss hid the money in there.
Yeah.
Because Chigurh knew from the last. Now we're getting into the weeds a little bit.
Okay, sorry. Let's get out of the weeds. Get back. Okay. I interrupted you. Yes. Get back on track.
Yeah, it's okay. So I think that he kind of lets a sigh out, and I feel like it's in that moment that he decides, like, this is never going to end. Like, I just confronted my fear. I push the door open. I go in, and then there's just another thing for me to tackle here.
He doesn't. He can't resolve it there. Yeah.
You can't fix it. You can't wrap your hands around it, and that ultimately leads to, like, the other most important scene of the movie, which is him going to see Ellis. But
before you go to Ellis, though, and I want to go to Ellis, and but I want to say that my theory about that scene again is that they can't see each other. They cannot see each other. Like, they are actually representations of the same thing, but just two sides of the same thing. And I think like that's why exactly like we said.
Okay, go ahead. Tell me.
No, but like that's why the image of the coin, right? Like the head of a coin can never see the tail of the coin, right? They're on the same structure, but they are part of the same structure. And I want to push back against you a little bit. I don't think it's about him at all, the fact that he does not understand what he's dealing with. It's not that at all. It is that he does understand very well what he's up against, and he knows that there's nothing he can do about it. That's the thing. He knows that no matter, and as a sheriff, again, if we take him back down to the level of just being a man, he knows, and a sheriff in a world where a 14-year-old girl is murdered just to see a 14-year-old girl murdered, and that's it, because a guy wanted to murder somebody, he knows that the forces out there are never, ever, ever going to go away. No matter how many arrests he make, no matter how many times he has to save people, he will never, ever be able to just stamp all of it out. So like, what's the point? Right. And that's what he is wrestling with, that the terrifying inevitability and unstoppability, let's say. I'm sure there's a more articulate word for it, but there's this hopeless, like there's nothing he can do ultimately, right? The little things that he's doing are in the long grand scheme of things, like it doesn't, it's almost like it doesn't matter. Like, and it's terrifying. It terrifies him because he sees the indifference. He sees this like kind of moral vacuum, that like, but what I think, and this maybe can spin us into Ellis, like what Ellis, I think, in that conversation reveals to him in a way is that, no, man, like you are a part of the same structure. Like we're all a part of this structure. Like you are not this thing that is separate from that. You are that as well. And and I don't know if you want to take us into Ellis, because
Sure.
I can go on and on, but like
Yeah.
I think that scene that might be my, we were joking before, like it's the most important scene in the movie. I don't know if it's the most important, but it's definitely, I think, my favorite conversation in the movie actually is with Ellis.
Is.
And Ellis, I think, honestly, is my favorite character.
Well, no, I think, he goes to see Ellis sort of as like a mea culpa in a way. He goes to kind of he has to face someone once he knows that he's decided to quit. He's decided to hang it up, and he's not going to do it anymore. You have to face someone. Your wife's going to support you. You're not beholden to the people that worked underneath you.
And we get the sense that Ellis might be like a brother or a cousin,
like an
or
uncle.
something.
I thought he was
an uncle,
like
maybe.
An uncle, maybe.
Yeah, maybe an uncle. Like, and I get the sense that he's going there too, maybe to face him, but also just to get some advice. Like he's like,
Sure.
Sorry to cut you off.
And so that's very much how the conversation kind of plays out. And I think the important part of the conversation, and again, it'll be hard for me not to take off, like you say, and up into the clouds. But
it's okay.
They start by talking about, he tells them a story about how I think it was his Bell's grandfather. So this would have been like at the turn of the century.
1909.
1909. That's how he says it.
Yeah, 1909.
He tells a story about basically how Bell's grandfather was a sheriff and was murdered on his front porch, right in front of his wife by criminals, by guys that as Ellis says, they wanted this or that. Yeah. They rode up on horseback and they all wanted this or wanted that, and he tried to turn around to go into the house to get a shotgun, and they shot him. They killed him right on the porch. And and then they just stood there, and Ellis says they just stood there and watched him die. And then they rode off. Okay.
Slowly.
And so,
in agony,
and so,
And
I think that for me, my interpretation of the film, or what it made me think about, was that the reason Ellis tells him that story is to try to actually give Bell a little bit of comfort in this idea that, like Bell says, I feel overmatched. I feel like I can't contribute anymore. I don't understand this world. And essentially Ellis is like, no, this country's always been hard on people. It's the way it's always been. It was difficult for your grandfather. It's difficult for you. And it's not about, and then they get into this kind of conversation about God. And, Bell says, like, I always thought God was going to come into my life. And Ellis is like, no, dude, that's vanity, man. Like you think that it's all about you. It's not. Okay. That's the way this country's always been. And I want to say one more thing, and then I want to hear what you think about it. But, it struck me that, like, a big part of who Bell is like, reminiscing and romanticizing the past. He talks about that in his opening monologue, how, like, back in the day, some of them never even had to carry a gun. Like, that's how great things were. Sheriffs didn't even have to carry a gun. And I never missed a chance to listen to stories about the old timers. Whereas Ellis is like, dude, those are just stories. Those are just ideas of what the past was. Whereas in reality, it was hard for them, just like it's hard for you. And to think that it's like about God or you or God coming into your, like, that's just vanity, bro. Like, this is this last thing I'll say about it, I want to hear what you have to say, is the title of the movie kind of jumped out at me on these recent viewings, was this idea that there is no country for old men. There is no, like, dude, back in the day, it was a country. No, dude, you got shot on your porch. Okay. There is no country for old men. You're going through the same thing that your grandfather went through and that we've all gone through. But anyway, go ahead. What do you think about Ellis?
I think it's right. I think and this is, I'd say, the most metaphysical kind of conversation in the movie. And I think, okay, so I wanted to point out the line that you mentioned about, like, how Tommy Lee Jones, Sheriff Bell says, I always thought that God would kind of show up, and he never did.
He didn't.
And he didn't. And he didn't. And again, sorry, here's another image of absence. He's absent, like it's an absence. Mm-hmm. But I think is interesting to your point is you're absolutely, you kind of nailed it. But like you're right. He's trying to, like, hold this story in his mind about when sheriffs didn't have to hold guns, when there was order, And again, I'll take it back to that other conversation with the sheriff well, I don't remember where they are for.
After Moss is killed.
After Moss is killed, and they're talking about like kids walking around with the bones in their noses and green hair and you know, and
walking the streets of our Texas towns.
Walking the streets of our Texas towns. Yeah, and Bell, that actor's great too. And Bell says, you know, I think it starts with like not saying sir and madam anymore. You know, like in other words, we're losing these like traditions that actually do sort of maintain an order, and like that's disappearing now. Like it's evaporating, you know, like it's moving away. And we talked about this last week, and we said, you know, I think what we're also encountering here is like this kind of cyclical view of things. Again, this deep time, right? Like the idea, for example, that like you would somehow be able to establish some kind of eternal like order and justice. That's vanity. But I think a lot of what this film is about is this, we're looking at a world basically where there's this kind of absence, where there's an absence of God. There's an absence of an overall structuring kind of like sort of traditional idea of a Christian God. There's also, I think to a degree, sort of an absence of history too. We're kind of, and the reason we're in these Texan plains and things like that is because it's kind of this empty landscape, you know, like that things can play out. And we're watching in this sort of absent kind of world, we're seeing these forces like hunting each other. Like when you remove God, like you just have like, you know, power
like
essentially.
Acts, right?
Yeah, like power just trying to dominate, like forces smashing into each other and trying to dominate each other. Like that's it, you know, like this swirling kind of like chaos. And I think what Ellis is telling him is like, you know, we're living in an age where man has forgotten God in a sense, like, or man has like, doesn't see God anymore. What man does when we make that decision, and I think it's a commentary a lot on modernity and maybe even like the American version of modernity, this sort of ultra individualistic kind of ethos of, you know, what you're doing when man says like what modernity signifies. And again, this is what this scene made me think about, is that man is saying, look, there is no God anymore after the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, you know, Darwin, whatever, you know, like we don't need God anymore is almost what they're saying. Right. And so when you do that, what you're saying is like, okay, if there is no God, then I'm taking responsibility. Then man is taking full responsibility for the world, as it's called, for man, right? The world for us. We control the world for us. And that comes from this book I just read called In the Dust of This Planet by Eugene Thacker, where he talks about, it's all about cosmic horror, actually. And there is the world for us. And then there's this idea of the world not for us. And that is the sort of side of reality that we do not have access to as human beings. It's literally the unthinkable, right? We cannot experience that. So, you know, death. And I think
that's fascinating.
Yeah. And what came to me in this scene with Ellis is this notion of like, what I think Ellis is saying essentially is that when man had the vanity to say like, we're going to take control of the world for us, or we're going to take control of the world. Well, unfortunately, when you do that, when you decide, okay, we're taking full responsibility and we're in control of the world for us, part of that bargain is that you also have to then take responsibility for the world not for us. And in the past,
forces,
right. And in the past, like, God used to handle that for you, right? Like God provided a higher meaning that gave meaning to the things that we could not experience, let's say. But if you're going to do this, if you're going to make this commitment, Bell, like you have to accept that you can't have half of it. You can't control and understand and take control of everything. Like you have to take all of that, all the things. And that this reality essentially is this turning almost like a coin, a flat, you know, time is a flat circle, right? This regenerating, and all of these things are constantly, you know, our world is a dynamic, basically. It's always going to be a dynamic between these two things, between these two forces of order and chaos. And you, sir, represent order, and you cannot exist without the other side of you, which is chaos. Like, that's what this film makes me think about. Man has to take responsibility for all of it and can't.
Well, it's interesting. Because it kind of does naturally lead me into that other most important scene in the movie, which is the last scene, which is when he's talking to his wife about his dreams. The first dream he talks about is about going to meet his dad in town, and he specifies, like, both of the dreams were about my dad, but I'm older than he ever was by like 20 years. So in the dream, his dad was like the younger man.
Yeah,
and he talks about in the first dream about going to meet his dad in town, and he thinks it was about getting some money from his dad, but he lost it. Okay. And I thought about what you were just saying about this idea that, like, if you think that you're going to take on the burden of responsibility, that, like, that's a huge responsibility that you were just describing. And it's like this idea that, like, you better learn from the past. Like, in other words, was his dad in the dream giving him money, or was he giving him kind of like knowledge? Like this idea that, like, you have to learn and understand the scope of this thing that you're taking responsibility for. But
yeah. It's not about, in other words, it's not about like stopping something.
No,
it's about being able to understand it, to experience it, to understand how it is inextricably linked to what you are.
Right. The second dream it's a great story. And, in the movie, in the film, he tells the story of the dream that he's like, he was out on horseback, and it was kind of like those olden times, he said. And it was cold and dark, and his father came riding past him on horseback, and he could see that his father was carrying fire, like he says again, like the way they used to in the olden times, and like a horn. And he could see by the glow of the fire that his father was like all wrapped up, and his father didn't say anything to him as he just rode on past out into the darkness, out into the unknown. And he knew that whenever he got to where his father was, that his father would have a fire there for him, and it would be warm. And he's like, and then I woke up, and it's super intense. It's amazing. Again, it's amazing that it's in this like great genre crime thriller. This is kind of like what we've been talking about. But when we talked before, I told you something that I'm going to try to repeat. And because I think it's important for me, for my interpretation of the film, was this idea that, and I kind of think it goes back to what Ellis was saying, which is this idea that good doesn't exist to change the world. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying just now about Sheriff Bell. It's like this idea that, like, you're never going to change it. It's two sides of a coin. They have good and bad, or order and chaos. They have to coexist. So good doesn't exist to stomp out evil or change the world. It's this idea that good exists in spite of the other side of the coin, in spite of all the chaos and cruelty that we see in the world. There's goodness. And the idea that the fire in the dream that Bell's describing, the fire is almost like light. Light is like goodness, like the light at the end of the tunnel, or the light that navigates our way or shows us our way. We follow the light. And so, the world can be cruel and uncaring and lawless, but it always has been. But the fire never goes out. And I think that for me, the idea is that Bell knows that, he's going to have to travel in the darkness and follow the same path as his father did, but his father is setting the way for him. And that was Bell's responsibility, is to light the way for the next person. Okay. To kind of like be the fire, be the light, or be the righteousness that you want to see in the universe, that you want to see in the world. You don't have to save it. You just have to continue to kind of light the way.
I like the idea of illumination.
You're the light for others to follow.
Right. You are helping others see, but it's not about, you're never going to be able to get rid of the other side of this.
Right.
I think actually what Ellis is saying to him is, I know we're talking about the dream, but in the Ellis scene, is he's saying this isn't, good and evil are human constructs, man. They're just human constructs. It's not There is no good and evil, man. This is a big
old complicated universe.
Goes way beyond that, and you can't expect to think that it's just good and evil is vanity. That's a human way of dealing with all of this. And so for me, that fire up ahead, you need to carry on the ability to see this structure.
Like the cycle you said. Like
it's more about it's about wisdom. Mm-hmm. You know, the light of wisdom.
It's pretty incredible that the Coens again, I keep bringing it up, but like, you know, you watch this crime, this intense, like you said, your wife is like squeezing your arm while you're watching. Like it is a like master work of genre filmmaking. But like we said at the top, like you start peeling back the onion, you're like, holy shit, they're talking about like God and the universe and time and wisdom. And you know, it's just, it makes me laugh because that's why I picked the film, because it has all this stuff. I mentioned to you before, I've actually shared it with you. I read this interview with Tommy Lee Jones, and he was talking about the film, and the interviewer asked him about the end of the film, and I'll just read it because I can't articulate it as well as I can just by reading it. But the interviewer says, "No Country for Old Men hardly concludes conventionally. Some might consider it pessimistic." And Tommy Lee Jones responds, he says, "Well, it's a cerebral movie, but I wouldn't say it's pessimistic. The last speech is a contemplation of hope, a dream about however dark and cold the world might be, however long the ride through it might be, that at the end, you know, you will go to your father's house and it will be warm, or to a fire that your father has carried and built for you. The last sentence of the movie is, and then I woke up." It's an idea. It's a contemplation on the idea of hope. Is it an illusion? Is it just a dream? And if it is the dream real? I think it asks very good questions. And I believe that an assumption by Cormac, by Ethan and Joel, and certainly by me, is that the very best questions are more important than anyone's wide variety of answers. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was just like a really great way to kind of sum the film up. You know, like I could say I couldn't agree more. And I think that to a certain degree, that's what this podcast is about. It's all about asking questions, and those questions are way more important than anyone's, even your and my interpretation of what it might be. And that's why that's why we're talking about it, is because it poses these amazing questions in this framework of an amazing film. And it allows us to sit here and talk about it.
And I would say that all of the films that we've chosen, you know, a characteristic of them is that when you come away with them, they very explicitly do not answer any questions for you. If a film is telling you what to think, it's not an authentic film. I'll say that.
Right.
I think authentic films or authentic art in general, you know, it's about what they illuminate in your own experience. It's about the questions they make you ask and make you contemplate. And I think what they'll always do, what great works always do, is they sort of reveal that the closer you look at reality, the more complex it becomes, but also the more beautiful, you know, for me anyway. That's what I think. Yeah. So great works of art, they ask more, and he said it, you know, they ask more questions. They should ask questions, not answer questions. Bob, thank you so much. Thanks for, you know, again, I just want to appreciate
Congratulations on 10 episodes.
And thank you for getting back in the booth with me today after last weekend, and I think it was worth it. So, everyone, you've been listening to the Authentic Cinema Podcast. I just want to thank everybody for listening. If you are enjoying the podcast, you can support us at this point by giving us a thumbs up or a subscription on YouTube or Spotify. That's where you can find us. As I always say, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend. If you don't like the podcast, please tell an enemy. Just tell somebody.
There you go.
All right. Take care, Bob.
You too, man. Take care.